It's a very strange countdown. It's more like about a 5.5 second, 3 second countdown. All right, and I think we have our what's her name? Nora. We have Nora turning all the different directions and stuff. So what we want to have happen is we want her to bump into things, and well, not necessarily bump into things, but as she's walking around, have the chance of getting into a fight. Okay, so we need to come up with like a random number generator, right? So maybe we roll the dice. So we'll go into our what script do we currently have? We have the Nora control script, so that we can probably do it in there as she's moving around. I think maybe I suggest to do it in fixed update. Come up with a random number. If you did it in update, it's not going to be the end of the world. Do consider, though, that generating a random number is somewhat time-consuming. It actually is an interesting question how they would have implemented this in the original Final Fantasy. Where we had a much slower frame rate potentially, right? For this game, we're probably getting 120 frames a second or something like that on this game, running what's considered to be the second highest end graphics card today. Well, back on Nintendo, I'm sure you weren't getting that level of stuff. So if you would consider the update function then, generating a random number was a substantially higher percent of the time that the update method would have run. So then you have to ask the question, well, should I generate a random number every single time, every single update? Or what would be an alternative for like a performance? Go ahead.
I think what it's done before is you make a random number once and then do a countdown for how far you move there.
Okay. So you're saying you do a random number, just generate one random number? Okay. So let's say I generated a 7. Mm-hmm. So that as I move, that 7 counts down to and then I'm in a battle. Yeah. And then when I come back, it generates another number? Okay. But still then that means, let's just assume the average was a 7. Just for no good reason. Just I'm picking that as an average. That means that still every 7 frames, you would be generating another random number. Or I suppose as we're loading the next scene, or when we came back to the scene, we would generate our next random number. So you only had to do it every now and then. Yeah, it's probably not a bad idea. One thing I was thinking that you could do is take the time, and actually that solution is probably better. It's better to make a scene take a little bit longer to load than to have pauses while you're playing. So that's more of a game design type thing. So what you could do is just create a big array of numbers and just fill it up with random numbers when the scene first loads. So you have a whole bunch of random numbers to feed off of, and then just operate off of the next bucket of that one. And then even coupling it with your idea, we can count it down on a per bucket basis. But actually, I think your idea is okay. It's probably actually better because now we don't have to take up the memory to store it. So we'll generate a random number. Is that going to be like the number of fixed frames? How do you count it down? How do you go from 7 down to 0? When is there a move?
Yeah, the way I thought of it would have been dependent with based on blocks, but with that, I guess you'd have to have a timer going while you're walking or something. Or maybe every time you change directions, it counted down.
Yeah, but I'm thinking which is worse. Is it worse to ask the question, did I change directions, and then count it down, versus generating another random number?
Well, it's already asking if you change directions.
Yeah. So we can just throw it in there, I guess. But actually, hold on. Is it asking if it's asking if the button was pressed. You know, we'd have to experiment with Final Fantasy to see how it actually works. But I'm pretty sure well, I guess I'm almost positive that you can't just stand there in Final Fantasy and eventually hit something. Like, I don't think you could just have your guy sit there static and after 30 seconds or something, he all of a sudden enters a battle. I think he has to be moving in order to enter a battle. That's correct, right? Yeah, you can't just stand there. So clearly something we would probably need to consider. For us right now, let's just keep it simple. But those would be the kinds of problems that we might have to consider. I do like your idea of only generating the random number on a per scene basis. You know, as soon as we have a battle, that's when we generate the next number of steps it's going to take before your next battle. So then the question is, let's look at update here. If the key was pressed, I guess we could count it down. It's not a bad idea. Should we just go with that? So what we would do is on start, we would have like a private int steps left, and maybe start this off at -1, something like that. And then on start, we would give it a number between, you know, let's call it, I guess we could do a 1 and 100 or something like that. You know, maybe for us, we make it shorter just so we can test it, because we're going to look at Scene Manager today, how to move between a scene and then come back to the scene and preserve state and that kind of stuff. So let's give it a number. I think, what did we do? We give ourselves a random number generator, private random r, and then in start we'll say this dot r is equal to a new random, and then we'll say this dot steps left is equal to r dot what's the function for get the next
Remember you for non C# has a random number and Unity has a random number. They
like to.
You have Unity's C#.
Oh, what's C#'s lower?
Random too, but you
have to do the using thing. Well, so can't we use?
You can use Unity, so if you do random dot range, you don't have to.
Oh, it's not okay. I gotcha. So with Unities, we can do something like random dot range, and you give it the starting and. So minimum we'll say is 1. And max is inclusive in this, which is actually different than most random number generators. So that'll be from 1 to 100 inclusive. So that'll give us a random number. And there's lots of ways you could have generated random numbers. Okay, so that'll give us our steps left. And let's go ahead and print that just to make sure that's giving us a value that we're happy with. So it'll give us a 96 steps left. And then let's go ahead and we're going to print out the steps left as we move. Even though printing is a little bit expensive, but that'll give us a good way of kind of seeing it. So then what we'll do is, instead of printing it out there, and now we're going to actually, instead of doing it in fixed update, let's do it in update, since that's where we're asking our questions for movement. So at the end of update, we're going to go ahead and print out steps left. Actually, let's not do it in update. Let's not do it at the end of there. We'll print it multiple times. We'll only print it if we made a change, just for performance reasons, because printing out is expensive. All right, so if we're in here, we're going to say this dot steps left minus minus, and then print this dot steps left. And maybe what we can do is we can, it's going to take us longer just to write the function. So we'll put that in each of these else ifs for which button is pressed down. So if we have one of our movement buttons pressed down, we'll go ahead and decrement our steps left. And print it out, showing us that the countdown. Okay. Now this will happen on update, and it's not whether or not we just press the key down. It's if the key is being held down as well, is we're going to have that countdown. Otherwise, if we wanted to trigger it, we'd have to keep pressing the key over and over again for the push down event on that key. Okay, so we'll come in here. Right there. Oop, yeah, that jumped real quick for number of steps. So we probably look at we're already at the negative 600 and stuff. So we probably do want to generate a higher number than 100. Now, even with that still becomes problematic. That's where we would want to move it into fixed update. Because fixed update is going to give us a consistent performance across all machines. Because right now, a faster machine is going to allow you to power level more quickly, because you're going to be hitting all that stuff more often. So if we come in here and I just take, I'm just going to steal fixed update. Yeah, the rest of it's identical. So we'll put this in fixed update instead of update. And it should jump a little bit slower for us since we were going faster than that. Yeah, it definitely is moving slower for us. I mean, I've moved quite a bit further. I'm only at negative 200. So that will give us a consistent performance across all machines. I think maybe the first week of class, I mentioned something about a game I played when I was a kid called Double Dragon. And when it came out for PC, I played it in the arcade. And when it came out for PC, we had it on a fairly old PC that is way older than any of you. And it ran fine on that because that was the PC that was out when that game came out. Well, a couple years later, we got a much, much faster PC. These were in the days when, like we look at our computers today, clock speed and stuff is not really going up. We're seeing some new architecture, new features in this year's Core i7 versus last year's Core i7 from Intel processors. But generally speaking, in terms of just raw computing performance, the Core i7 today and the Core i7 from 4 years ago are pretty similar, not a gigantic leap. Well, back in the 80s and 90s, the leaps were huge. So you would have you would have a machine from last year to this year have a 10-fold increase in performance. And that actually might be an underestimate. I mean, it was moving that quickly. So we've kind of hit this wall right now for the last many years where things aren't necessarily getting substantially faster. It's just getting that next little bit of performance out of it. So at least now what we've done is we've constrained it to 60 frames a second, so we can now tune it for that. Whereas if we go back to that Double Dragon game, I'm not sure which feature under the hood was was the problem because they weren't using a de facto game engine or something like that. But somewhere in there, they had to have, on refresh, right? The equivalent of an update type method. And, or they may even just use busy wait, like for loops. How long does it take this for loop to run on a machine last year? And that for loop runs a whole lot quicker in the machine this year or something like that back then. Because the game became unplayable when we loaded it onto our newer computer. Because everything happened like instantaneously. All the enemies were out. Just everything was there. And the game was unplayable. So that's why we would not want to put this logic inside of update, because that's going to now be bound to the performance of the computer you're on. Fixed update should at least give us a relatively equal playing field across all machines. I have to assume that fixed update gets a little wonky, or maybe a little bit less accurate on machines where the natural frame rate is actually slower than 60 frames a second. It's possible it doesn't, but that would be my guess, is it's not quite as reliable at that level. It all comes down to how they're actually estimating fixed update. But in any case, it should give us a pretty consistent cadence to our stuff. So if we tune it for fixed update, we should be relatively equivalent across all machines. All right, so we move that into fixed update, and now we see that we have a lot more control over that countdown. Okay, we could probably still go above 100 if we wanted to. What was the original number? Oh, I stopped printing out the original number. I'll just take one step forward. So the original number should have been maybe a 18 or something like that, whatever my countdown was. So even with that, you would have to be several moves until it dropped down. That should give us a decent test. Okay, so the idea would be as soon as that hits 0, and let's go ahead and throw that logic in. So instead of printing it each time here, we're convinced that it's going down. Now down here at the bottom, a fixed update will ask the question, if this dot num, steps left is what I called it. If this dot steps left is equal to 0, and ultimately this is going to be, should we start a fight? And right now we'll just do a print, start fight. All right, pretty quick fight start there, but still we're good with that. All right, so now what we want to do is when we start a fight, we want to have this go to a brand new scene that allows us to start this fight. Now, some things we have to be concerned about though is we really want, and actually, just real quick, I want to give, I'm going to say 200 to 800 for my range. Just want to make sure I can get a little bit farther distance, so this will become obvious for the next thing we're going to talk about. There we go. Yeah. Definitely had to travel far for that. Point is, we're definitely away from our starting point, right? We could probably whittle it down a little bit from this, but regardless, we're away from our starting point. And why that's important is because when we go to the next scene, and then we ultimately come back to this scene, we want to see that we are in our old position, that we're picking up where we left off, as opposed to having a brand new start scene where we're basically starting the whole game over. Make sense? So there's some different approaches we need to look at for this. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to create our second scene. So we're going to call, I'm going to, down here in our assets, I'm going to do a create scene. And we'll call this guy fight scene. Actually, just call it fight. Keep it shorter. All right. Now, in more recent versions of Unity, I think it started in the Unity 5 series, might have been 5.3 is when they actually introduced it, but I think Unity 5 is when it started, which is one version older than 2017. 2017 is effectively a rewrap of Unity 5. But they changed the way scene management worked. Before, you would just load the next scene. I think there was like what was called like load game level or something like that was the function. Well, now they actually introduced this thing called Scene Manager, which gives you a little bit more control over things. So let's look at this. And I'm pretty sure I remember how to set this all up, but if not, we'll reference something. So I'm going to go to build settings. All right, not build settings. Project settings. There is a script manager in here. I really thought it was under this thing before. There's a script manager where we have to let it know about the next scene. I wonder if it's automatic now. I really thought it was under build settings. Oh, scenes in build. It was in the first place I went to. I just chose not to read the screen. All right, so right at the top of build settings, we have this thing called scenes in build. So we're going to go ahead and add the open scene. So main's going to be in that guy. And I'm going to close this. And then I'm going to go ahead and double click on my fight scene, just so I'm in there. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back into build settings. And I'm going to add that open scene. What this effectively does is it adds these scenes to the build and gives them an under the hood index. So chances are this guy is scene 0, this guy is scene 1. But you know, it's the point is that it gives us, we can reference it and say load main, and it will figure out where main is. Load fight, it'll figure out where fight is. Okay. And let's do something on this scene. So for right now, I'm going to go back into our main scene. I'm actually going to steal Nora from our main scene. So I'll just do a copy, even though Nora is going to be a little bit different on, actually Nora will be different on this scene. So I'm not going to steal Nora. I'm going to just go into the fight scene. We're going to go out here and we're going to grab the Nora that's facing to the right. I'll drag her out there. I am going to size her the same as she was in the first scene. So let me go back to main and let's just look at the, I'll save that scene. Let's look at her scale. She's 441. Okay, so there's Nora, and let's make sure we can get to the scene. So I'm going to rename her here. Okay, so we should be able to see Nora on that scene. We can go ahead and make the main camera a child of Nora for right now. Actually, we're not going to want to do that in this particular scene. Because if you remember from Final Fantasy, what ends up happening is you kind of have your dudes over here, and then they just step forward and then step back when it's their turn to fight. So we don't actually want the camera to follow Nora. The camera's just kind of looking at the scene. So we should be able to see Nora on this scene. That's all that's important for us. We'll be able to tell the difference between this scene and the other scene. The other scene has green crap. This scene does not. So we'll know we got here. All right, so we're going to go back to our other script. And up top here, I'm going to say using, I think it's Unity Engine .scene management. All right, so we're going to bring in the ability to use the scene manager in here. Okay, and then down here, when we should start our fight, we're going to go ahead and we're going to say scene manager dot load scene. And the scene we're loading, notice it takes in, there's a couple different versions of this. We have one that takes the index of the scene builder, so that would be 0 or 1 probably for what we have now. It can take the name of the scene, which we're probably going to prefer. And this is the one we're going to ultimately use, but I'm just going to give us some foreshadowing here. The one that takes in a load scene mode. I'm going to talk about that here in a few minutes, but that's not the one we're going to use first. Actually, this is the one we're going to use, the one that lets us pass in the name of the scene and the load scene mode instead of the index and the load scene mode. This load scene mode is going to be pretty important for us. All right, so we're going to say we want to load the scene called fight. That's what we want to happen here. All right, and we can actually take out the start fight here. We proved we were getting in there. We'll have to wander around for a little bit till we can get into the scene. All right, and let me go ahead and let's just pare this down a little bit to, let's maybe go 100 and 300. That should definitely get us a travel distance away from our starting point, so we'll know we're at a different place. All right, so as soon as we have our steps left down to 0, we will load the fight scene. So let's go test this. Make sure you're in your main scene as your starting point. We'll click it better. There we go. Okay, so I was pretty far north of the map, right? So now we're in this scene. Clearly, we're in a new scene now. Great. So let's go ahead and let's just attach a fight script to Nora for right now. That's going to allow us to respond to some controls. And then just for the starting point, why don't we just put a timer in there that'll kick us back to the previous scene after 3 seconds or something like that? Just so we don't have to do any actions. Actually, we can just do it on a button press. That'll actually be better. Okay, so let's go into the second scene now. I'm going to go into my scripts folder, and let's create a script called Nora Fight. All right, and we'll reload the solution. Of course, it didn't show up in there. Double click it again. There we go. So here's our Nora fight, and we're going to end up attaching this to the Nora in our fight scene. And then let's just go ahead and let's add a fixed update. Actually, let's leave it in update. That way it's will be very responsive for us right now. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to say if input dot get was it key down. So this is going to be when I actually first press the key. It'll let me just say spacebar goes back or something like that. So if get key down key code dot space, so spacebar will get us back. If that's true, then we want to use our scene manager to go back to the previous scene. So again, we're going to have to say using Unity Engine dot scene management. All right, so we'll have access to the scene manager in here, and then we can say scene manager dot load scene, and the name of our scene was main. Okay. So we'll go back in here. Let's go back to our main scene. Actually, let's go to our fight scene and make sure we put that script on Nora. So there's our Nora fight script. Okay, now go back to the main scene, because if you don't go, whatever scene is currently loaded, if you just hit play on that guy, it will start here. Although that allowed us at least test it real quick. So our spacebar does seem to be working. Okay, so let's go back to our main scene. And what we want to see, I'm going to save this scene. We want to see if when we go back to this scene, if Nora is in her starting location. So, remember her starting location here, kind of even with this plot of dirt. And we'll head north some, and then we'll head west some. All right, so we're here. The space bar, we have to restart this scene. Probably not what we want, right? Because now it's like this, like Nora has to just random luck. Can I get to my destination? So we want Nora to be able to continually make some progress. So let's go back into our scripts. Now, instead of load scene, we're going to look at a couple of other things here. We're going to say unload scene. And we can pass it the scene build index, the actual scene, or the scene name. So we're going to pass it the scene name. So we're going to unload scene fight. All right, so instead of loading the old scene, we're going to, what's this guy complaining about? Oh, it wants us to use, so it's telling us this is obsolete. We can still use it for right now, but it wants us to use the better performance version of this. So there's an unload scene async. Async stands for asynchronous. Anybody know what that means? What does it mean for something to happen asynchronously?
At the same time as the other one.
So it's happening in parallel. So things are happening in parallel. Things that happen synchronously, if I have a line here and a line here, if this code executes synchronously, I cannot get to this line until this code happens. This code would be said to block. All right. If it happens asynchronously, let's say this guy takes 5 seconds to occur, just as we're destroying a lot of game objects. If this guy takes 5 seconds, if I do it synchronously, I don't get to this line for 5 seconds. If I do this asynchronously, this guy is happening inside of his own thread. I get to this next line immediately. So it gives us a performance benefit where our machine's working in the background, cleaning up this scene. So we'll unload asynchronous. Okay, and that's a truth across the board for all sorts of computer science stuff. Things that happen asynchronously means they do not block. Things that happen synchronously means they block. So you'll see that in other classes. So unload scene async, and the scene we're going to unload is our fight scene. Okay. So what we're trying to see here is what happens when I unload my previous scene instead of loading the main scene. I'm not sure what I just clicked, but let's just call it a good thing. So we'll hit play. We'll zip out of position here. Okay. Pretty soon here we need to get some music in here because this just doesn't feel fun yet. All right, so now we'll hit the space bar and the scene has unloaded, but I have no scene to go back to, right? So that means when we leave one scene to load another scene, the previous scene also then gets unloaded. We've lost it. So we need to have the ability to pause main scene, go to this scene, and when we unload this scene, we come back to main scene and pick up where we left off. That's ultimately what we want to happen. So let's just go back into our code here, and let's go to our Nora controller, where we actually loaded this scene. And there was another version of this guy where we give it the load scene mode. So we're going to give it load scene mode dot additive. So this adds the scene to the current loaded scene. effectively pausing our current scene, loading the next scene. Next scene does its thing, and as soon as we unload the next scene, it unloads from and just bounces back to its parent, because the second scene will actually be loaded in place of the current one, not instead of. Not sure if that's even the best way of saying it, but both scenes are alive at the same time. All right, so save that. Go back in here. Have Nora rush up to the top. Oh, I actually hit the space bar. Horrible timing. All right. I think I was trying to get her to jump. That's what I was trying to get Nora to do. All right, so, oh, no, that's not what happened. Load scene additive. Should have done that.
It's loading. At least for mine, it seems like it's loading the scene. It's just not showing. I can see it in the
Yeah.
panel.
Right. I think we need to make it the active scene. Let me look at something here. Scene manager dot load scene. Does this give us a scene as a result? No, it returns a void. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come into Nora Fight, and on start, let's do scene manager dot set active scene. Scene manager dot maybe I need to get the scene. Pretty sure the issue here is that at once I need to set the active scene. Scene manager dot get scene by name. We'll call this fight. That should return for me a scene. And then we'll say scene manager dot set active scene to that scene. Let's see if that does what we want it to do. Does not. Oh no. Additive not showing next scene or something like that. Yeah, here's the set active. Okay, not with the new scene manager, the 531. I think we're doing the correct thing, but let's go back in here. I'm just going to create a function here. Void set active. I'm going to move this active scene there. See if this works first, and I'll explain why I'm doing this. And then we're going to say invoke set active. And I'm going to just say 0.5f. Okay, let's make sure this does what I want it to do. Oh, hold on, I'm doing that all in the wrong script. Sorry. I'm going to steal this function back, and we're going to put that in the NOR controller script. So actually, it seems like maybe, did I have that active thing in the wrong place anyways? So I'm going to paste this in here, but I'm actually going to comment it out for a second. And I'm going to say this dot set active. Because I don't remember whether I had the stuff in the right scene before. I think I did, but I'm confused now. So let's just retest what I thought I tested before. Okay, yeah, it works the same way that it worked before. All right, so now I'm going to actually call this on an invoke instead of immediately. No. Man, it cannot be this complex. So this is the situation that they seem to be talking about. When we load this fight scene, this guy takes a period of time to load. Some amount of time. Now, that's why I put this timer on here to set, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to set that fight scene to be the active scene after an amount of time. Now, they indicated, one of the things I just read there, that it's guaranteed to be loaded by the next frame. So I figured, 0.5 seconds should be plenty. That should give you a good buffer. So I'm trying to set that fight scene as being the active scene. Might need to, can we save the current scene? Maybe this additive thing, because the additive thing is supposed to be the solution to this problem. When we say load scene mode, let's see if this guy gives us adds the scene to the current loaded scene. Great. This guy closes all loaded scenes and loads a scene. All right, so that's the default experience, is single. Additive says don't close the current scene. Instead, just go to the next scene. And we'll load it inside the scene. Okay, so I have that. Now, scene manager.load scene does not return a value. So it doesn't give me the scene, and I'm not loading the scene asynchronously. So the idea should be that by the next line, this scene should be loaded, because this scene would block. So then scene manager dot so let's do get all scenes. Let's print out the length of that. It should be, I want to know if that's 2 or 1. All right, I can get the scene count. That'll work too. So instead of getting all the scenes, I'm going to get the scene count. So I want to know whether scene count gives me 2 total scenes or gives me 1 scene. Does it tell me the total number of scenes added, total number of scenes in the game right now, or the total number of scenes added to the current scene? So I'm going to print out the scene count when we get there. There are two audio listeners in the scene. So is this a different 2? Okay, there's 2 scenes. All right, and by saying there's 2 audio listeners means that we now know there is 2 scenes loaded. So now I'm going to say scene manager dot set active scene to scene manager dot get scene at 1. So instead of bucket 0, which is the current scene, it'll be bucket 1, which is the scene we just added, presumably. I would have thought get scene at 1 should be the same as get scene with name, which would have been fight, but let's see if that's the case. Why? Right, so that didn't seem to make a difference.
Do you still have something in your door?
I don't think so, but let's check. Only if I mean, here we can, it doesn't seem to be putting us back, but let's just comment that out just in case it's getting hit or something. We don't want to have a way of getting back now. So I think it's a reasonable question to ask. That's behaving the same way. Let's Let's not try to set that next scene to be the active scene before we try anything else. Does load scene really indicate, I mean, doesn't that sound like it should? I mean, you purposely want to load another scene, right? So shouldn't it just automatically go to that scene?
You would think so, but it doesn't.
Unless it's a performance thing where at the beginning when a scene first is created, we can load a bunch of scenes as additive scenes, like to be able to quickly switch them, even though we seemingly can't switch them. We're just being elusive. But
from Unity's documentation, it sounds like it should load on
yeah.
frame.
Well, it should be guaranteed to be available by the next frame. That doesn't necessarily mean it'll be active. That's what I was trying to do with this active scene thing. What if here, before I do anything else, just in case it loads this thing backwards, let's try to set 0 to be the active scene. Just in case. it happens to set the new scene at 0 and move everything else down. I can't imagine that would be the case. But if it's a linked list, then it could do an add front or something. No. This was so easy before. You just said, when you loaded the next scene, you would just say pause current scene. And the next scene would just load normally. And then you would just destroy it. And you'd be right back where you left off. Okay. So that's... What does merge scenes do? All right, so we could create that next scene. But that's not going to let us load it. All right, so it loads the next scene in the All right, the way this is acting, just see if it's, so I'm going to click on game here, and right now I have maximize on play. So I'm going to turn that off. That way we can see our hierarchy over here. So when we load it additive, we should see two scenes over here. Oh, compilers. Okay, so there's our second scene. So is loaded. It doesn't appear that I can set it to be active in here. I can set that one to be active. Now I can set, okay, so this one was active. It did set it as the active scene. Well, it's not very nice. All right, so loading it additive creates it and sets it as the active. So why can't we see active scene? So it's got to be loading it on top. How do I show the two scenes? It's already active. I don't want to make it on it. I don't want to unload it. I mean, the alternative way of doing this would be, well, this would be the hack way of doing this, would be create a singleton, place where we can store variables, and we're going to do this anyways. Load the current position of Nora on our map. So when we leave the scene, remember where Nora last was, so that when we come back, we can check to see if that had a position for Nora and just put her back on the map where she last was. So that would solve our problem. But that's more of a workaround on how the scene manager actually should function. So we have a scene. What does scene utility give us? So get active scene gives us the current scene. What can we do with that scene? I wonder what merge scenes will actually do. Okay, so why don't we do this for our homework, including my homework. Why don't we figure out how to show that second scene? So hopefully between all of us, we come up with a solution for next class. You don't have to submit it. Just come up to class next time with an idea on how to show it. I'm sure I'll figure it out too, but research that for next class. Sound good? And then what we'll do next class is we will, assuming we have our second scene showing, we're going to do our logic on that second scene. We're going to show how we can get information from the first scene over to the second scene. So we're going to have to start creating like hit points, things like that, like Nora's current vitals, so that when she's fighting, she gets hurt, she comes back and she's still kind of hurt. Okay. All right. So sorry about that. I'm not, my knowledge did not transfer over to the new version of Unity as well as I had hoped. So I will see everybody on Thursday.